Hey everyone, I'm HarvestBuildDestroy, and in this video I want to talk about something a bit different. Deliberate practice in Age of Empires 2. Think about when you were a kid, playing house league soccer, hockey, baseball, or whatever traditional sport was most popular where you lived. At least where I'm from, most casual house league sports for kids meet twice a week. Every week you have a game, and every week you have a practice. My friends and I were frustrated by this as kids. We didn't want to drill throw-ins in soccer or skate around pylons in hockey, we just wanted to play a game against another team. And yet half of the time we spent in these leagues was spent repetitively drilling the independent skills required to play the game well as a whole. While I didn't like it so much at the time, in hindsight, I acknowledged that it was probably good for us. Prior to the advent of esports, most of us wouldn't have necessarily even thought there could be such a thing as deliberately practicing an RTS game like this. But even now that esports is established, I think most of us tend to have the same attitude towards RTS games that me and my friends had towards hockey practice. I think especially for newer Age of Empires players, incorporating deliberate practice of the individual skills required to play the game well could be one of the best ways to improve your play in a short period of time. I also think this is particularly true of Age of Empires in comparison to other RTS games, for the simple reason that Age of Empires matches are long. Let me explain what I mean by analogy. If you want to build muscle, you have to lift weights, and you have to do enough repetitions to force your muscles to grow, because the body's natural state is to want to stay the same size it is now. Similarly, if you want to play Age of Empires well, you need to get the reps in. But individual AoE matches take a pretty long time. It's not uncommon for a game to exceed an hour in real time. Even if you block off an entire afternoon or evening to play Age of Empires, you can still really only play a decent handful of games. If you were to dedicate the same amount of time to StarCraft 2, for instance, you could fit in 15 or 20 games. When the duration of an individual match is so much shorter, it's quite a bit easier to consistently have the opportunity to practice all of the individual skills required to play the game well, even without doing so deliberately. There are a lot of situations in RTS games that only show up in 1 in 5 games or 1 in 10 games, often enough that you need to know how to react to them, but not so often as to occur in a typical game. If you're playing a game where the individual matches typically last 45 minutes to an hour like Age of Empires, it can be hard to get the opportunity to practice reacting to these types of scenarios more than a couple of times per week. In StarCraft 2, you might be lucky enough to encounter these semi-fringe type situations every day or two, but in Age of Empires, you could easily go a week without, depending on how much time you spend playing the game. It takes a pretty long time to get even a rudimentary handle on the basics in Age of Empires 2. Since most of us have been playing the game for decades, we probably don't think about this too much, but it's true. The opening 10 seconds of a game of Age of Empires 2 are pretty hectic. A skilled player may already be using as many as 4 different control groups by this point. One for the Scout Cavalry or Eagle, 1 or 2 for Scout Sheep, and another for the villagers eating the remaining sheep at the town center. If a brand new player were to ask me what to do to improve, I would be inclined to tell them to spend close to half of their playing time practicing competitive build orders in single player. In the same way that you need to learn how to dribble in basketball before you can play a game, you need to at least learn how to lure a boar before you can have any hope of surviving an AoE 2 online play. Even at a fairly intermediate level of play, losing a villager or having idle TC or scout time in the early game are relatively common. And, well, fair enough, Age of Empires is a punishingly difficult game, but if you're willing to put in the work, these are skills you can practice deliberately, over and over, by yourself, without even having to find a custom scenario. Given how long a game of Age of Empires takes from start to finish, I would argue that up to a fairly advanced skill level, it's worth your time to spend 15 minutes or so in single player at the beginning of every playing session practicing build orders, if you're truly serious about improving your play. Think of it as like stretching before a soccer game or something like that. You can subdivide this into smaller skills too. For example, if you're a more intermediate player, you might want to spend more time just practicing luring deer to your town center on an explored map, for example. If you're a brand new player, your best bet is probably to find a fast castle build order and practice it until you can get to castle within 1 minute of when the tutorial says you're supposed to. For anyone looking for such a guide, Resonance 22 has a great fast castle tutorial for beginners on YouTube. And beyond just opening build orders, if we consider the fact that most builds center around getting a few crucial units out at an opportune moment, such as, for example, drushing, men-at-arms rushes, or scout rushes, you might want to spend some time practicing microing those units. There isn't much point learning a build order like that if you can't get anything done with the units it allows you to create. There are plenty of micro-training scenarios out there that you can use for this, but you can also just go into a deathmatch game with a friend and turn on cheats to practice things like this. In general, aside from practicing build orders, Most forms of deliberate practice work best with another person. While the procedurally generated maps in Age of Empires make it essentially impossible to find yourself in exactly the same position twice, it's still worthwhile to practice the same civilization matchup on the same map over and over with a friend of similar skill. Another thing you can do is get the game to a certain point, save and exit, and then reload the game multiple times to practice that scenario over and over. For example, imagine you've been practicing a Men-at-Arms rush build order in single player for quite a while, to the point where you can execute it quite well, but you haven't actually practiced the rush itself against a real opponent. You and a friend could play a game up until the point where you're about to move out with your units and then save and exit. From there, you can practice executing the rush itself, as well as the subsequent transition into archers, without having to replay the opening 10 minutes of the game every time. As convenient as micro simulators are, and you should definitely make use of them, practicing micro in a vacuum isn't the same as practicing micro when you have to think about macro, which you will always have to do in real in-game scenarios. The possibilities of deliberate practice with a partner are just about endless. You could argue that this sort of practice doesn't really prepare most players for realistic in-game scenarios, since the majority of Age of Empires players play mostly if not exclusively team games, but if you're really serious about improving your skill level, there's no better way than to play 1v1s. At this point, you might be inclined to ask, why should you bother drilling these sorts of things as opposed to just playing real games and using your new build orders there? Well, particularly at lower levels of play, whenever you try a new strategy, you're initially going to experience certain hiccups in your execution. You're probably going to screw up the build order in one way or another. Whether that means putting the wrong number of villagers on a particular resource in the Dark Age, forgetting a crucial upgrade, or whatever it happens to be. And like I said before, Age of Empires matches are long. These little mistakes generally won't lose you the game right then and there, but they may cause you to have to play from behind. You won't really get to see how effective your new build truly is when properly executed. Until you reach a pretty high level of play, the time invested in a few dry runs of a new build order against an AI before testing it out against real people online will nearly always pay dividends. Before I wrap up, I should note that drilling and other forms of deliberate practice are by no means substitutes for playing real games, but rather a way to supplement the games you play and improve your play faster than you otherwise would. Some might argue that doing this sort of thing takes the fun out of playing a game, which is, supposed to be fun, but remember that nothing worth doing is easy. More often than not, the reason that RTS players gravitate towards RTS games in the first place is because of how punishingly difficult they are. If you want to play basketball, you're going to have to practice layups, and if you want to play the guitar, you're probably going to need to practice scales at one point or another. If developing difficult manual skills isn't something that appeals to you, you might want to ask yourself if RTS games are really your thing after all. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider rating, commenting, subscribing, or sharing. See you soon.